Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this amazing Sunday. And we are here for another installment in our week of action. And we are discussing how to meet the unique needs of LGBTQIA youth folks. And I have an amazing set of experts and panelists for with you all. We are welcoming Jamila. Their pronouns are she and her. Hi, Jamila.
Hello.
And we also have Kylie, who is joining us from Y to Y, and her pronouns are she, her. We are also joined. Oh, say hi, Kylie. We are also joined. We are also Mel from New London is joining us, and their pronouns are they, them. And last but definitely not least, we have Kiana, and their pronouns are they, them as well. So thank you, you beautiful humans, for taking time out of your Sunday. And I'm hoping that the thunderstorm that we're about to have does not knock out our connections. And so before we get really in too deep, I would like each one of you to take some time to introduce yourselves. And so I'm going to ask you, Jamila, to go first. If you would not mind to please introduce yourself.
Jamila, she, her, hers. I'm a fellow at Citywide Youth Coalition. And I don't know what else. That's it.
Maybe one word to describe how you're feeling right now and today.
Excited. Yeah, I'm feeling excited about this panel. I think we're going to have fun. So.
Thank you. And Kylie?
Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be with you all. My name is Kylie Nassif Blizzard. I use she, her pronouns. And I am the Data and Program Evaluation Manager at Y to Y. We run shelters for young adults experiencing homelessness. We have one right now in the Boston area, which is where I am. And we do have the thunderstorm, so I'm sorry if I cut out. And we're in the process of opening a second site in New Haven in collaboration with Youth Continuum.
Awesome. And if you wouldn't mind sharing, Kylie, what is your one word to describe how you're feeling or yourself or something right now?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good. Hyped to be here.
Awesome. I'm just taking notes to add to your questions. And so next we have introduction. I'm trying to remember how I brought you folks in. Mel, would you please take some time out to introduce yourself? Amazing.
Sure. Hi, I'm Mel. I've been working with True Colors for about 5 years, and I run Q+, which is about a year old now. Both groups work with queer youth specifically. True Colors does a lot of social support groups. I go into a lot of schools as True Colors. Q+ is more about raising and amplifying youth voice and getting it out there. So in that regard, we do a lot of open mics and would be doing resource fairs if we could all be in a room together, but we can't. So open mics online are where we're at right now.
And your one word to describe yourself or how you're feeling?
I go with queer because it like establishes what I'm going to talk about pretty fast. So I just go with that.
Kiana, may you please introduce yourself and give us your one word?
Yep, of course. My name is Kiana, so I use they, them, or she, her, hers pronouns. Let's see. I'm a mental health worker, and I'm a current student, so I study forensic psychology, and then I do some work with the Life of My Days, and I run the mutual aid work from New Haven, so with our mutual aid work. So that's pretty much it. Oh, and I'm excited. That's my feeling.
Thank you. Y'all folks are amazing. I can't wait to get in deep about some of these things. So I'm going to kind of get in kind of deep, and this question first. So I have some questions for each one of you folks, and then I also have just some general questions, and I'm gonna write some things down and pull some stuff out of what you folks say. So this first question is actually for Jamila. This is an epic time in the world. And Jamila, you led a march of 5,000 plus people just a couple weeks ago. And it was an amazing day. It was awesome being part of that. So thank you. I personally, and most of us, heard your demands. But can you share a little bit why the demands that not just you but the team of Citywide Youth developed, and why they are so important for LGBTQIA plus youth and young folks?
So our demands are very important to LGBT youth because most of the young people that work with us at Citywide are queer folks. So we're tackling being Black and brown and being queer and fighting racism and stuff like that. So most of our demands were like about the school system and about just like community wise. So obviously LGBTQ like youth go into that because most of us are in the community in the public schools, myself included. So our we kind of formed them around ourselves and what we would like to see like changing and things like that. So yeah.
Thank you for that. And so Mel, I have the fortune of knowing you in real life before this, and so I stalked your social media. Um, and I stalked it a couple of days, but then today you had an amazing post, and I don't know why you thought that it wasn't gonna come up, but it was really deep. And the space that you work with and the spaces that you hold with True Colors and Q Plus, I thought that your analysis using Harry Potter and connecting that to the world that we're in right now. As being a Potter fan, I have Harry Potter tattoos on me. So I'm like really in that thing. And so, we've been dealing with some stuff with JK lately. And I was just wondering if you can maybe share a little bit of your analysis, your Harry Potter analysis with the folks. Because I thought it was amazing. I was like cheering it on when I read it. And so I'm throwing you under the bus, and I don't apologize because that analysis was amazing. Can you share it with folks?
That's fine. It was I talk a lot online, and the post was basically about how I just decided that millennials are Harry Potter because we're told we're special, and somehow that magically justifies that we didn't get any parenting. We rely entirely on our grit and feelings because nobody gives us like tools and information. We're universally expected to save the world despite not having those tools and information. So we're all like salty and depressed. Gen Z comes in as Hermione. So they're not told they're special. They're not like constantly put on a pedestal, but they value and express work ethic and awareness way more. They find the ways to get the information and do the work and create the impact. And they do that all while being super anxious all the time and being dismissed or ignored all the time. And then I said in both cases, the government is fascist and the author is a bigot. So here we are. So that was my piece. I could write a whole article on that. I write articles on things like that. But I was kind of just going off thinking about kind of cultural values and expectations put on both generations and how we're kind of fighting a very similar battle, but from sort of different corners and how that works together. And I was like, I have seen this plot before.
Thank you for that. And that leads me to Kiana, and with that analysis floating around into our world, what is your opinion or your perspective, especially from the different work that you do? You work a lot with youth and younger folks. You're a younger person yourself. You're definitely not my age. And so what are your thoughts around the needs and the necessity for queer young folks?
Well, I think that's a great question, by the way. And I think a lot of times, like I was discussing this before, is sometimes when we phrase the question of like, what are the needs met, we end up with, kind of the main big things that we always need to meet, which is like, like racism, homelessness, and things like that. I specifically, before my time, before I came here, like towards my like sophomore year of college or junior year, I did an internship at an LGBT youth program specifically. So we spent a lot of time meeting those needs. So a lot of things that we focused on was access to sexual health education. So in order for any youth to participate in our program and our groups, they had to go through a sexual ed course where they learned pretty much everything. Like, it was all inclusive sexual ed course, and that was the basis for their attendance. We provided free mental health services, so that's something that is, a great big need, especially for LGBT youth, is mental health services. But also we provided a social space. So a lot of times when it comes to LGBT youth, they don't have these social spaces where they can be around other people who have very similar ways of living as them. And a lot of times we see with LGBT youth, but LGBT people in general, is this idea of isolation and alienation. So being able to have those community spaces where you can meet up with, 60 other kids who are also, LGBTQIA identified, means a lot. And also, in those programs, the staff are also LGBT. Like, a lot of times they are LGBT identified. So it's also giving those kids the opportunities to see LGBT adults. We had a lot of staff who were, either queer, lesbian, gay, or trans. So like they can also see that type of representation. So that's another important thing, is like representation. But I think the issue we had was that through representation, we were only getting Hollywood representation, which was like stereotypes and things like that. But being able to have representation of people, of community members within our own community, makes a pretty big difference. So most of the things, the needs are kind of like, definitely a lot of things with socialization, because especially for kids growing up, socialization is everything. Access to medical care, like the people don't think about, especially if you're a minor, you are in this unique placement of where kind of you don't have full autonomy. You're essentially a property of your parents. So a lot of times with LGBT youth, we see that their medical care, their therapy, their health care isn't confidential. They have to go through this gatekeeping process of their parents. And if they're not comfortable, if they're not out, if things like that, obviously that's going to be a problem. And that providers who are giving this care, a lot of times they're not trained either. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know how to work with LGBT kids. So I think that is like the primary thing I see is mental health care, access to community, access to care, and access to care that is free of discrimination and microaggressions, and just trauma in terms of like being marginalized. And then lastly, I'll cut it over here, is like, I say that the unique thing of working with LGBT youth is that when we're working with LGBT youth, we're working with the youth, but we're also we have to be mindful and work with their households, their families, and their communities. So we have to put that all in perspective when we're working specifically with kids.
Sheesh, Kiana, you stole one of my questions, but I'm gonna go back to it. Because there was some poignant points, and access is what really shoots out to me, and not just access to, like you said, the big topics around housing and stuff, that inclusive of the things that we all need for socialization. I find myself as a queer adult sometimes still needing to be okay with just being out and proud and still validating my queerness and why I get to live and why should I live. And I was just doing that all day the last 2 days. So I get it. And that leads me to Kylie. I haven't had the pleasure of meeting you in real life yet. So this is our first introduction. Thank you so much. And work with Y to Y, which I'm going to ask you in your answer to this to please just describe and explain what Y to Y is. But from my understanding, Y to Y is a program that works to thwart youth homelessness. And so I haven't had a chance to stalk your social media like I did Mel. And so I'm wondering, what are your especially in the demographic that you work in, what do you feel are the needs of young queer folks, and what are around the work that you see happening in Boston, which is a huge city, which has a huge number of queer homeless folks, and I believe that number is close to like what's happening here, which is scary. So can you share around what you're seeing and your insight in another state, but so very close to Connecticut, around the needs for young folks?
Yeah, definitely. So Y to Y, we are a support organization that works with another organization out of Harvard to run Y to Y Harvard Square, which is a homeless shelter for people 18 to 24. And basically what I and other professional staff do is coach the students, provide training and support through running it. So we employ youth to youth models. So basically the student staff are usually the same age as guests that are staying in the shelter. We have a huge crisis of youth and young adult homelessness in Boston. We also just have like a broader rental crisis in Boston. So the FMR, the fair market rent, which is about the 40th percentile, has increased over $500 over the last 3 years. So right now, Boston has a faster rate of increase than New York and DC, and is actually now more expensive than New York and DC. So overall, it's a crisis for everyone. What we see at Y to Y is that of young adults experiencing homelessness, we have about a third identifying as queer and trans, and 20% declining to state. So we expect that it's a little bit higher, which is close to sort of national averages, which is obviously a huge overrepresentation. And we also have about 60% people of color, majority Black and Latinx, staying at the shelter. So lots and lots of queer and trans youth in what is like a very white city experiencing homelessness. And so I think like what is super critical from the service provider perspective is acknowledging that nonprofits are steeped in and born of capitalism, white supremacy, patriarchy, homophobia, and transphobia, and that like naturally anything that nonprofits do participate and play into that. And so when you're designing a program model, it's really important to think about not replicating other program models just because they're an industry standard, and working with the people that you're actually serving to design your program model and to compensate them for their labor during that process. And the other thing that's really critical about that is to be open to learning and providing like space for particularly young people to adapt and change how they identify, and to affirm that, but also be affirming of how people identify as is, and accepting that that's real and legitimate.
Thank you. And so it's interesting how there are more programming, there is more programming being created for the 18 to 24 age demographic. But and so Mel, because I know that you also work with a younger demographic, you are inclusive of younger demographics in this. I would love for you to speak to what you feel are the needs of young LGBTQIA plus young folks, and curious as to how that looks different and is the same.
I was thinking about that in the comments about like 18 to 24, and I'm like, the huge obvious gap is 17 and under. In healthcare, like you said, like before, about being basically property of your parent, or like housing, you can't, a lot of times there are no shelters that will take you unless you're 18 and can prove it. Like there's just this huge gap where we don't serve the literal most vulnerable part of our own community. And that plays into the nonprofit piece, that plays into all the things. And like, I have a lot of feelings about it. So that's what I work on. I'd honestly echo a lot of what other folks said about like the obvious needs of housing and healthcare, social support, being in a space where people just see you as yourself and use your correct name and pronouns and don't question you or tear you down in terms of who you are every few minutes is really important. A lot of times kids don't get that, like youth don't get that anywhere else. So that's really important. Showing them there are queer adults who care, and yes, you can grow up, and yes, you can be part of this big scary world, and hey, you can even help make it better is important. And I think access to education and information is really important and is left out a lot. So I know a lot of young people who, you know, Stonewall happened, but we don't know anything else about how there must have been a movement to get to having a queer bar in the first place, or how that developed into parades. Like there were years of things in between the two. They don't know that. They don't hear any queer anything in their history class or any representation, even in like word problems in math class, there's nothing. Like queer youth grow up thinking they invented queerness because they don't see it anywhere else. And that's a problem. Sex education, huge problem. We don't talk about safety in regards to like non-heterosexual contact at all. We don't acknowledge trans people exist, let alone talk about like the mental health and the things that you might experience. And like, hey, if you're like, imagine if we learned in sex ed, even just in passing, like some people transition, they might take hormones, they might take puberty blockers. If you want to know more, here's a resource. It could be a 5-minute thing, but it's 5 minutes that don't happen. Young people just don't have access to that, and you don't know what you don't know. So that's the scary part, is when young people know what they're missing, they can go online and find it. They can go and contact an organization and start getting that information. But they don't always know they don't have that. And they don't always have that ability if they're somebody who doesn't have access to the internet or isn't allowed their own cell phone, things like that. I could keep going, but I feel like I should take a rest.
Yes. And that's why I came to you with that question, because that we feel so much the same when it comes to the folks that are in that in-between range, like the 12 to 17. And sometimes even I would love to be inclusive of like 10 to 17, because young folks nowadays are the one thing that I've noticed is that young folks now are coming into their autonomy no matter what, and they're doing it so liberating, but there's a lot of risk in that when you're 10 or 11 or 12 years old, that, you know, once we're 16 and 17, we're bigger, we're stronger. Sometimes, you know, you can decide to leave and decide to be homeless, as opposed to staying home and being abused because of your queerness. But I wonder, what do our younger folks who are told that you don't know who you are, and that happens in society. I have seen adults tell young people that you don't know what you like, and I always really struggle with that. I'm like, what? But they're in their head. How do they know more than anyone? But I see that's the ageism, and I try to keep myself around young folks so they can call me out on my ageism, and I don't sink into thinking I'm always right. And Kylie, you had an amazing point around how all the service providers and all the systems are built and inherently racist, are inherently anti-queer, anti-trans, because they need to be inclusive of the fact that some queer people are anti-trans, which I still am trying to wrap my head around. And we need to create programming that does not replicate the problem. And I would love for whomever has an idea, this is an open-ended question for anyone. How do we do that? How do we co-create this new system that doesn't replicate oppression of young queer folks, especially Black and brown queer folks, especially Black and brown trans folks? How do we work to not, and what do we do to not recreate that? I'll call on whoever.
I can go. So I'm a facilitator with the Black and Brown queer camp that Citywide has, right? So we talk about this a lot, and some of us, we talk about how you just don't want to repeat history. You want to try to learn as much of the history as you can, right? So you're not repeating any mistakes, because if you don't learn from the mistakes, you're bound to fail again. So we just talk about learning our history, even though it's very hard, because our history is usually like, especially Black and brown queer folks, our history is usually like put on the back burner and you don't really hear about it. So I know in our conversations, we talk about just like trying our hardest to like reach out and find sources, like reliable sources on our history, so that when us as young people are trying to do this work, we have a broader idea of like what's right and what's wrong, do's and don'ts of like doing this work. So yeah.
I encourage anyone else to add to that.
I'll jump in. I think another important concept, like specifically, technically, A Life in My Days, which is what I'm contracted through, is a nonprofit, but essentially it's like a nonprofit that doesn't support how nonprofits usually function in terms of upholding, oppression in any way, or, the institution. But at the same time, I think what comes down to it is that we have to think about healing our communities and healing how we treat each other, how we interact with each other. Because if we don't do that work, that's like the basis of the work. So a lot of times we see issues in these, I guess, organizations, institutions, is because we no longer know how to treat each other. It's become like a capitalistic kind of business thing in terms of, well, if I put a person of color, if I put a queer person in this position, this is basically my diversity token. And basically our only focus is making sure we get numbers and profit so that we can keep getting our funding. And so we have to turn away from that, where we're focusing on funding, although we need the funding to survive, but we need to heal what's going on in our communities. Because when we think about homophobia, when we think about transphobia, we're also talking about sexism. We're talking about misogyny. We're talking about trans misogyny. We're talking about, patriarchal ideas and how that's shaped our communities. So we have to start at that to kind of get to the next step. And that's going to take a lot of work for communities, because we can't come together if we have all of these wounds that are stopping us from uniting.
Thank you, Kiana. If anyone wanted to add to that, I'm taking notes because I'm trying to become a co-creator always. And if anyone has anyone else to add, please, to that question, please do.
I can add a little bit. Oh, sorry, Mel. I think Jamila and Kiana both made really great points. I think like from like a policy development or like program eligibility requirement perspective, honestly, like where you're funding from determines a lot of what you're going to be able to do. And that's a sad fact. But the other thing that like you can do is question every assumption that you have and like really interrogate that assumption. So a really like basic specific example I can give is that if a guest stays at Y2Y, they're not required to provide their legal name, which I'm sure in New Haven is different because you have coordinated access, but we don't have that in Massachusetts right now. And so we thought about it for a long time, and like usually people would need to provide their name for staying in a shelter, but there's actually like no legitimate reason that we need it, none. So our policy is that guests can go by whatever name they want to go by. They have to go by one name at a time so that it's like not confusing. But if they want to change their name, just let us know, and then staff are required to comply with that. And there's also like no reason for us to see their IDs or anything else like that. And if like someone is working with a case manager who's doing legal work for them and they happen to know their legal name, like it doesn't need to be documented or shared with other staff. And I think like just the idea that you wouldn't provide your name to a service provider is like kind of crazy when you think about it at first. But then once you we started to question that assumption, there's like actually no reason that we need it.
And before Mel, I still want you to answer, but just a literacy moment. Coordinated access is what we call the CAN here. And when you're entering into homelessness and you call 211, if you're a young person, now there's a youth homelessness. And I put that in quotations because I'm being facetious right now on purpose. But the youth you can get added into that, and that's how you get into our Department of Y2Y and our youth housing, our youth homeless shelters and things like that. And so there's a win in not having a coordinated access, a CAN, because then you have the ability to affirm folks and still provide that support. The coordinated access can be ran so many different ways, but I wanted to just share that literacy moment for folks in Connecticut, that a coordinated access is when you call 211 and you get entered into the homeless wait list for adults and youth folks alike. Mel, what were you going to add?
Just we're talking about co-creating and just tackling that literally and co-creating and going to the people you're trying to work with and saying, what do you actually need? And what are the actual like ways that you want us to get there? I can't tell, like I work with a lot of different nonprofits that work with youth. We kind of try to link up, which makes sense, but I can't tell you how many of us have a youth leadership team and those young people are homeless or hungry or failing out or whatever it is. They're dealing with some real stuff and we don't know because we didn't bother to ask. And like we put that work on them, but we don't do anything about actually addressing their actual needs. We do programs like our social this has been rectified, but we had social programs where we were giving people snacks. We weren't giving them food, and our own leadership team was going hungry. And like, that's not okay. And I see that copy pasted in a lot of different youth organizations, like all over. So addressing it as like equals, what do you need? How do you think we should get there? And then your job is to fill in the blanks of how you can support that happening, but also to remember to see the whole person. Like someone had said before, being like tokenized, like this is not like your token young person who is here to make you look good on the internet. See this person as a person. What do they need? now with the whole corona thing, like we have youth I haven't gotten into contact with for months because they don't have computers. And I can't fix that like for everyone, but we're doing what we can to try and identify some resources and connect people, like see them as people, and then go from there.
Thank you for that. And if anybody would like to help Mel on their quest to make sure that their young folks get those computers, you can probably donate to them. I'm sure that they would love that, to help repair some of that. I'm always championing and campaigning for people to pay us. So I want to put that plug out. Pay these young folks and these young people that are on these boards. That's a thing that we do so well at the Pride Center, which I think is an amazing thing. We make sure that we pay everybody we can, especially now through COVID. And I want to thank you, Mel, for sharing around the food insecurity, because one of the initiatives that we have at the Pride Center, I have to plug this, is we have a food pantry. So if anyone that is watching or needs food, or if anyone that's watching and you know folks that need food, please contact us an email or find us on Facebook, and we have the access sheet so you can fill that out. And so one of the things that just came up was access to sex ed in an all-inclusive way. And I will share full transparency. When I first started working with the Black and Brown Queer Camp, was my first time meeting young ACE people, which are asexual folks. And so I love to sit at the feet and learn of everyone, and it doesn't matter about what their age is. And so I was able to understand a different part of our rainbow that I hadn't ever really got to sit down with folks and talk to their lived experience. And so I would like, and this is an open question again, how can we be inclusive to the other letters in our LGBTQIA plus family when we're talking about things like having access to sex education that is inclusive of their lived experience? Does anyone have any ideas? Or, I mean, it's kind of clear, but we need to say it out loud anyway, of how we can create those systems of education for all queer folks. Oh, well, Kiana, you were the one who were talking about it, so I'm gonna pick on you because y'all took too long.
Okay, no problem. So I've done some workshops with inclusive sex education, and then during my time in college, when I was involved with my local Pride organization, we did do a sex ed boot camp kind of for other college students, where we did do an all-inclusive model. But it's funny because I don't think we included asexual people in the conversation. So that's a good thing to point out, because usually when we do talk about sex ed, asexual people aren't really mentioned. But usually when I do teach, like if I am teaching about the different identities that are out there, I kind of break it down in just the scale between sexual feelings versus romantic feelings, and kind of how sexual attraction and romantic attraction are two different things, and that asexuality, although we understand it as a single identity, asexuality within itself is a spectrum. So asexuality covers a whole different, a whole bunch of different identities, and asexuals do get left out of the conversation. Like, I grew up on the asexual spectrum, and there are certain challenges that come with being asexual that aren't really talked about, or there isn't really the space to talk about that. So usually I try to tell people, like, I try to break it down into, romantic versus sexual feelings, and explain that, some people are going to feel different types of ways depending on their identity. But most people don't realize that those are two different spectrums, which is sexual attraction and romantic attraction. So that's usually how I address it. And then also when it comes to sexual health, like one thing we did in our program, because our program was a pro sexual health program, and we worked primarily with younger teens. So our age range was like 13 to, I think it went to 13 to 21. So usually we would always have like open conversations about sexual health. You could always talk to a staff member about it. And also as a staff member, you had to be comfortable with talking to youth about sexual health and sex. So I think also as leaders, as adults, we have to get more comfortable with having that conversation instead of shutting it down and turning it into something where it's like shameful. And I found that because I did do like service learning with the Boys and Girls Club in New Haven, and a lot of it is run by old Caribbean women, and so how like grandmas get, they don't like kids talking about sex. So those conversations don't happen. It's like, you shouldn't be doing that. That's wrong. Stop it. And so that cuts off ever being able to have that conversation. That cuts off being able to develop a healthy relationship with your sexual health when all you know about it is this is something to be shameful. This is something that I shouldn't talk about. I shouldn't address. And we would always provide like free condoms and sexual health materials to our kids, because at the end of the day, although as a parent, I know a lot of parents don't want to think about their kids having sex. Kids are going to have sex if they want to. So as much as we don't want our kids to have sex, like, they're going to have sex. So at least have them be able to have access to have safe sex, and at least be educated to make those informed choices. But also have an outlet where when things don't feel right, when certain situations are happening that don't feel right, there is an adult that can tell you, like, this is not right, this is wrong. Because we've had kids who were, they were experimenting or exploring their sexual identity, but they were in dynamics that were harmful, where like, oh, he was, forcing me to do this, and also being able to intervene during those conversations. So that requires actually listening to kids, actually listening to what they're saying, listening to their perspectives and their experiences, but then also being able to intervene and say, that's not right. So being able to show them what care looks like, but also show them what relationships look like, show them what boundaries look like. I think those are things that are also really important. Show them what consent looks like. And also, just one last thing is what I think is really important. And usually I don't know what would be the appropriate age to introduce this to kids, but I also, when I teach about relationships, I make sure I put in perspective all different types of relationships, so not just monogamy. Because as a society, all that we think is out there and possible is monogamy, and that's why a lot of people get in trouble and they don't feel like they're navigating relationships right, because they don't know that there are different dynamics of relationships. So that's also another one.
Mel and I are having big reactions to what you're just saying. We're out there like that. And I just thank you for the things that you said. And I was alluding to the relationship and the other things that come in and should be included in sex ed conversations. And so, Mel, you were having some big emotions just now around talking about other ways of being in relationships. Would you care to add anything more to that, please?
I'm always having big emotions. I just co-signing so much of that. People are so afraid to like introduce these concepts to young people, but like they have these feelings and experiences and interests, and if we don't talk about how to explore them safely, they're going to explore them unsafely. And I don't know how we still have to like explain that. But talking about relationships, talking about boundaries, what is coercion? What can you say no to? Because we raise kids to think they can't say no. Like we make them hug grandma, or we like enforce physical punishment, or we tell them you're going because I said so. And there comes a point where that gets internalized, and they continue that into like teenage years and older, and that plays out in really unhealthy and dangerous ways. And we never really think about the fact that that's consent, and we're teaching that they don't deserve it. And we need to talk about that and kind of undo some of that. We need to actually respect that they have bodily autonomy from a young age. So when it gets to a point where that becomes a sexual thing, they don't have the message in their heads that they don't own their own bodies. So consent is a huge deal. It's way more than like sex, yes, no, which is the only way it's taught, if it's taught at all. And thinking about consent, thinking about relationships, boundaries, personal boundaries, like all of those things are what teens need to hear, and they're the things that people are most afraid to talk to them about. And I find that infuriating. So I'm really happy you said all of that.
Yes, and Sharna Pearson, hey Sharna, is loving our conversation in the live comments. And Juan Carlos told you that they love you, Jamila. I wanted to make sure that y'all folks see the live comments as they come up. So Mel, I heard yes for teaching consent, yes for teaching boundaries, and body autonomy. It's so interesting that you said that, because I think about our trans folks who are young, and think about if they were exposed to having autonomy over their body and understanding and being able to understand that this is their body and that they were born for themselves, and if they need and whatever they need to do to be autonomous for themselves is what they need to do to be autonomous, instead of shaming into the binary, as I call it. So I think like the things that Kiana and Mel just spoke to, us roll into those things of just like being able to love on yourself and just know that if you feel something isn't right, it's not right. Mel, were you gonna say something?
Just at the concept of like not being allowed to transition until you're 18 kind of falls into this as well. Like we just don't want young people to have control of their own bodies, and it's infuriating and dangerous. So just tacking that on.
Yeah, and it affects young folks' mental health.
Al, I think you're muted.
I just made some amazing points on mute. But what I was saying was that I'm a cis, I have a privilege in being a cis woman. And I think that people who have that privilege want to force other folks to feel like they have that privilege. But I feel like that privilege extends to no matter what part of the binary a person is, or not part of the binary, that the autonomy that that we have as cis people, we should work extra hard to extend that to folks who were misgendered at birth, in a way that it was forced on them. Like I really struggle with the gender reveal parties and stuff now. It's like, you didn't even get to meet this young person yet. They're still in your tummy. How do you know? And that's where the lack of autonomy starts for young folks. It starts for some folks during gestation, and affects their mental health. Thank you, Sharna. Sharna was thank you, Sharna. And it affects our mental health, everyone's mental health. And I think about I was doing some work and got stuck down a rabbit hole, and I found the names of young folks who were murdered because that they were queer, and two of them were murdered by their family. And I believe in saying their names, and I want to make sure that. So Giovanni Melton was 14 and was shot by his father because he was queer. And Vayabana Mabishi was 16. And although the person that murdered her was not in her family, they murdered her because she was queer. And I think about how young queer folks at 13 and 16, if you feel like your parents or the people that that you live in the house with, because some folks don't live with their parents, you know, their caregiver, they don't love you and accept you. How could that possibly matriculate to how you think other people would love and accept you? And because, you know, they see it in their parents, and folks will know if your parents are homophobic way before you, more often than not, way before you ever try to come out or think about coming out to them. And so that serves for cognitive dissonance about who you are and the shame and stuff. And I think that goes into, again, it plays back into these systems and the lack of socialization and access. And I believe it was Kiana who said, being in spaces free from microaggressions. I call them macroaggressions because I feel like anything, a word, a sentence, a phrase that diminishes me is actually very big and it's not little. So Kylie, I'm going to pick on you for a second because you've been kind of quiet and wondering what would be tips that you have for caregivers and parents who are tuning into this, whether they know that their youth are queer or not, or if their children are friends with other queer folks. Do you have tips or anything that, because you're in that system, really in that system, that we can extend to caregivers and parents before their youth become homeless or before they have to take on one of their children's friends?
Yeah, this is a huge question, and I think like very like family and culturally specific. I will say that from what folks who stay at Y report is about like 8% say that they were directly kicked out of their home for like a sexual orientation or gender identity. And then another like 8 to 10% say they left home preemptively because they anticipated conflict. So realistically, we're not just looking at people who are being directly kicked out of their homes because their parents found something out or they came out to them. It's that they're in these environments where they know that it will be unsafe for them and they're leaving for their own safety. And I think like whatever you're doing that's letting them know that like being somewhere without a home is safer than your family is a huge problem. And so realistically from birth, trying to understand that like you might have a queer or trans kid that you don't know is queer or trans, and anything that you say about either of those groups of people like will have an impact on them, and you might lose them before they even have a chance to come out to you. I think like not true for everyone, but I am like a femme cis woman that like is like overtly religious looking. Rarely am I read as queer, which is fine for safety usually, but really bad for hearing what people have to say and think about queer people. And just know like from birth, your kids are hearing what you're saying about that. And you might think it's a joke or an offhand comment, but it could cause them to leave you.
Yes, thank you. Yes, and I bet you hear all kind of stuff because I hear stuff all the time, and then I'll be like, "But you know, I'm super queer, right?" And I like sometimes love to stymie a conversation because it affects mental health, and I feel like words are spells, and so I don't want you waving your hatred spells in my ears. Mary Clark joined us from Facebook Live and has a very pertinent question. I would love to hear each and every one of you's answer for this. They would love any advice that you folks may have for elementary school teachers. And I also say maybe even primary school teachers, because young folks are coming out. Do you have any advice for any elementary or primary school teachers hoping to create a safe space for young LGBTQIA plus people? And no, we did not cover earlier, Mary. We saved it just for you. So I would love all of you folks, because I know each and every one of you have amazing advice for Miss Mary, and Miss Mary needs to create a holistic environment for our children when we go back to school. So anyone could popcorn it.
Okay, I'll start. For me, I think what's really important for specifically school children is that it has to be, especially when we're trying to be inclusive in our institutions, it has to come from a policy level, I feel like, because it is good effort if one teacher or two teachers or maybe three teachers are trying to do something, but if it's not coming from an administrative, from a board level, from a policy level, it's not as effective, because it has to come from everybody. Everybody has to do the work. So it's like we have to make sure that in our schools, like the principal or whatever, the dean, they're not accepting instances of homophobia, of transphobia, of misogyny, of trans misogyny. We need to make sure that the other teachers are on board too. When kids say things out of line in class, those things need to be intervened on and corrected. When other teachers say things or see things happen, and those have to be, addressed and corrected, because some teachers may hear it and not say anything. It's one thing from kids bringing things from home, but when you come to an environment where those things you're saying from home are not intervened in social, I guess, communicated that they're wrong, those things, they don't learn that. They just think it's okay. So I think it definitely has to come from a policy level. The institution itself has to be dedicated to making the classrooms more inclusive, because one person can only do so much. It takes a community, right? So one person can make a classroom feel inclusive and safe, which is way better than having nothing at all. But I think, definitely has to come from policy level, and normalize using pronouns from a young age. If we normalize using pronouns from a young age, we have that idea of establishing consent for young folks to have consent over their identity and their names. And then that doesn't leave space for accidents to happen. Like, I shouldn't misgender a child if they have a name tag of their pronouns. So.
Thank you, Kiana. On point with the pronouns from a young age. Anyone else have anything to add?
I would co-sign like the policy stuff, and you need all the teachers on board. You need your school to be a safe environment, not just your classroom. But if your school isn't safe, you can still make your classroom safe. Like, even if you can't, like, keep pushing, because you're the adult and you have the power, and these kids are very young and don't. So keep pushing for there to be teacher trainings, keep pushing for places to be inclusive, but you also have control of your own classroom. So make that place safe and do it anyway, even if no queer kids show up. Because they're just not knowing it yet. They're just not coming out yet, whatever it is. They will have that memory. They will have that idea when they go home and hear bad things from their friends or their parents or whatever. They have that memory that, oh no, some people think that it's good and there are safe places. And when the kids do show up, just listen to them. There's this assumption that, like, the younger you get, the less you know about yourself, which makes sense in many ways, but we understand gender almost from probably before we can talk. We start to develop our gender identity very, very young. Kids come out as trans at like 2 or 3 years old. Like as soon as they find words for mom, I'm a girl, not a boy, that comes out. So elementary school, they know they have gender identities. They know they have crushes on people. You're not going to probably have a huge discussion about like safer sex and like dating and consent at like a college level with kids that young. And I think parents assume that, and that's why they're so scared of things like GSAs in elementary schools. But those kids have feelings. And at that point, you're not teaching those things. You're teaching those kids respect. You're teaching them self-awareness. You're teaching them community. And that's what you're focusing on. So make the space and make sure to listen while you're in that space.
Thank you, Mel. Y'all are so beautiful. Y'all are amazing. Anyone else want to add? Kylie, Jamila?
I'll add. Yeah, I agree with Kiana, should be, widespread policy. But I also second Mel talking about like making your space safe for whoever is there. Also, like statistically, you do have queer trans kids in your class. And if you have a very small class and for some reason don't, they have peers who are queer and trans and need to learn how to be good people towards their peers. I also think like from a curriculum perspective, you can include, queer and trans people and identities, and not in like a special, this is gay week way, but just like throughout your class, the topics should come up. This is also true about many other marginalized identities, but like you should have like books that include queer and trans people as like normal characters that have regular lives. History should talk about like queer and trans civil rights movements. I had a like women's and gender studies minor in college that didn't teach me anything about AIDS. I'm not saying like teach 10-year-olds about AIDS, but like it should be part of what you're teaching them in general, because we are people that live here and have been part of society.
So I would just talk about like what Kylie was saying about books and like having and being inclusive of all identities. Like there are learning prompts for math. Like include some queer people in there. Like you don't have to make it so obvious, but include them, because there are queer youth and trans youth that are in the elementary classrooms. I would also say just make sure you're like everyone else was saying, just make sure your spaces are safe. And I know it can be harder with like admin and stuff like that, administration, because they do breathe down teachers' necks, like to not do certain things. So I think that like make your space as safe as possible, even if you are getting pushback, because like these kids need to be like taken care of and they need to be like heard. A lot of times queer like voices are not heard as younger folks, so they do definitely need to be heard at all times. So yeah.
Can I add one more thing I forgot? Yeah, okay. Is that this is based on Facebook memes, but I have heard like a lot of my friends and seen a lot of memes about people like coming out to their English teachers as like the first person they come out to. And I just want to like, I guess, echo that like if parents are not safe, or like other adults and family are not safe, or if we're just like not sure if they are, you're probably like could be the safest adult that a queer trans kid might know and has regular access to and can talk to without their family there. So that's like a really critical like role that you could play in someone's life.
I would also say, Mary, link up with Glisten. They have the Rainbow Library that is inclusive of books for primary and elementary students. They have books that the storyline is not about the character being queer. It's about a person who is queer and they're just going through regular life. And so we're normalizing it. We sit at queer folks sit at the intersection of lovely intersections. We are not just queer. We are queer and these other amazing identities. And so once we normalize all identities, you'll be able to create that shift that you're looking for of safety. And I would echo everything that these beautiful souls just said. And also, when you're inclusive of pictures and things like that, include people that are queer. Get those books in your library. They don't have a big, this is a gay book up there. You can just slip it right on into the library. And that is Glisten, GLSEN, and they have the Rainbow Library. If you want more information on that, Miss Mary Clark Sawyer, please email me, myself, the Pride Center. You can go straight to Glisten and look online at the Rainbow Library, and they have a new edition. They have a new Rainbow Library every year. So you can go back a couple of years and get a couple of books for your age demographic if you don't already have some of those books. And I want to encourage any of you amazing folks who are watching us live. We still have about 25 minutes. So if you have any questions for this amazing panel of amazing souls, please put it in the live comments and we will get to it. Speaking of which, we have Sharna, who has been one of our #1 fans. And you're welcome, Mary. Mary says thank you very much to you folks. And Sharna has a question. How can we encourage the LGBTQIA+ community and let them know that they can make it? So many feel like they have no one. How can I let them know they are accepted? And so I'm assuming Sharna, if this is the Sharna I went to school with, and I think, yeah, I'm not gonna make any assumptions actually. So, does anyone have any thoughts around this question? What can straight allies do to create, again, safe spaces for queer folks? And I struggle with the word encourage because that means like someone has a lack of power, but that's just my organizer self, so I'm gonna put that to the side. And say that how can straight allies truly be an ally and a comrade and a co-conspirator with queer folks and create safe spaces? Oh yes, this is my Sharna. Hey, hi, we out here. Sorry. How can allies be safe, create safe spaces and let folks, queer folks, know that they are loved and seen and heard?
Okay, I'm jumping in. All right. I think really the best thing allies can do is just show up and continue to show up, but also in terms of showing up, knowing your position in showing up, in terms of your position to listen, and not necessarily form opinions of others or put your perspective in it. Because at this time when a kid is coming to you, or youth or adult, they're coming to you because they want you to listen, not and I think there's a quote like sometimes we listen to respond instead of listen to actually listen. And then be consistent with it. Be consistent with showing up. Don't just show up one time and then you see something happen and then you kind of you don't show up then, or so showing people that you do care, I think that is the best you can do. If people feeling like they're not being cared about, you can assert yourself as a person to kind of detract that that statement in terms of I do care, I continually show up for you, and then continue doing that. I think that's kind of like the best thing you can do. And also making sure, like, if you see anything wrong happening, if you see homophobia, if you see transphobia, making sure that you're also stepping up to the plate and you're intervening in that. Because it's one thing to be supportive, but if you're letting things slide in your own personal time, that shows that you're not consistent. So I think consistency is really important when it comes to supporting LGBT people, but supporting anyone and showing up for them.
If I could jump. So I agree with Kiana was saying. I think that like say it with your chest, people say, right? So like even when you're not around LGBTQIA plus folks and you're in spaces with other straight people and other cis people, make sure you're on, like, if it comes up in conversation or like you hear something like wrong being said, make sure you're standing up and like make sure you're actually like calling people out and holding people accountable, like holding yourself accountable too, because we sometimes there are people who say stuff and they don't even realize that it's harmful. But language is like, you have to be mindful of your language and what language that you're using, because some language is very, very harmful to people, whether we realize it or not. So I think that like being mindful of your language and being mindful that even when LGBTQ folks are not around, you still have to like wholeheartedly protect them. So
keep that same energy, right? Always. Anyone else have anything that they want to add for Sharna around how to be a legitimate ally to queer folks?
I think like I echo like social methods, but I also think just like give queer and trans people your money. That depends on, you know, who you are and what your situation is, but you know, especially if you're white, especially if your parents have money, if you're college educated, like realistically, like trans people face the highest rate of employment discrimination, very likely to face housing discrimination, and in general, like as a group, have less access to funds. So if you have money, give it to like organizations that support queer and trans people, but also just like directly to people, like to their Venmo.
Let's go. Let's go. Oh, I forgot I wasn't on mute that time. I'm sorry, y'all. Y'all hear all my background snaps and stuff. It's the best part of the panel. Mel, did you have anything you wanted to add before we go on to the next question? No? Okay.
I mean, I would just co-sign all of that. And then like the like little but big thing you can do is just normalize it. Just remember us all the time. Use your pronouns when you introduce yourself to people. Put them in your email. Have the queer books in your classrooms. Double check the policies at your office or your school and see if they're queer inclusive or not. Like, just make it normal to be supportive of queer folks, because it's not normal everywhere and it should be.
Yes, yes. Normalize caring for everyone, and then we don't have to have this balancing act. Ace Justice has a really dope question I really would love to hear folks. When parents are getting backlash from their kids' school using chosen pronouns or name and upholding certain inclusive policies, what is the best route to go to when addressing the school? Anyone?
See, the problem is that's really tricky. But it sounds like from that, the parents are supportive and the school isn't.
Right.
So that's, I don't want to say ideal because none of this is ideal. But if the parents are on the same page as the young person, then you can push forward as a family and support your child like in multiple ways in multiple settings, and that's important. I don't have the exact language of the law in front of me. So you would need that, but the law kind of sides on the side of the young person in terms of they are who they say they are. So if they're consistently identifying as she, even if they weren't born she, that person belongs in like the girls' team or the girls' classroom or the girls' whatever. The tricky thing now with the whole Title VII thing just changing, like I honestly don't know where that will land and how that will land. But right now it's like best practices has been let the young person tell you who they are and respect them accordingly. There are a lot of legal spots you can go. If you want to go that route with the school, if they're super not listening, if they're listening but they're doing it poorly, there are a lot of educators you can pull in. True Colors does trainings, Glisten does trainings, a lot of other folks do trainings. Call any of these people on this panel probably. So there's a lot of that, but it gets tricky in terms of the law, especially with the law so recently changing.
Anyone else have anything to add? I would say go to your Title IX coordinator for your Board of Ed. Oh my gosh, I'm terrible with names. I have ADD. Forgot the person in New Haven, but each Board of Ed has a different person anyway. So go on the Board of Education directory, and hopefully the woman is in New Haven is really amazing and she's with it. But we don't always have that in every city. But I would say make noise. But if I would just say, as a person who's not accepted all the way by both of my parents, just one of them, that it feels so good as a youth to see your parents, mama bearing it, championing for you. So what I would say as parents who are doing that, stay fierce, stay focused, learn every Title VII, every Title IX law for your Board of Education in your city. Make noise. There are folks you can contact, myself. I can point you in the direction of folks who are doing that work in the state of Connecticut to really support and stand with people. But this is the age of the cancel culture. I'd put that Board of Education all over social media so quick, you know what I mean? After you talk with your student, your young person, and make sure that's what they want. And I would say parents also, when you're championing for your youth, make sure that you talk to your youth first and make sure that they want you to be loud. Some folks would do well with just knowing that their parents would thwart the whole system and take out the whole system and don't want to be outed in such a big way. And other young folks are going to be like, well, as long as you stick beside me, let's do this. But one, I would just say, parents, if you're doing that, you have to battle right there. You're proving to your young person that their self-worth is the most important. So continue to champion for them and continue to do it in really aggressive, loud ways if you need to, so that your youth doesn't feel like they have to do that unless they want to. And I'm going to go back to, we don't have any new live questions. So I'm going to go back to one of my questions. And it's really kind of a kinship to what we were just talking about, parental gatekeeping, and what we've mentioned before. And I really want to harp on the demographic of young folks who are under 17 and are not named as much as in some of this social change stuff that's happening around queer lived experience. And so what can young parents of younger queer folks do to show their young people, even if they, if some parents know their kids better than others and might question or might think about, maybe my kid might be queer, but their kid hasn't come out to them yet. Are there tips that folks on this panel would suggest for parents of younger queer folks, maybe under that age demographic of 18 to 24, can do to create that, make sure that that safe space is also created at home?
I'll go. So I know, like, as a youth myself and having like mostly queer friends, like we would just like for our parents to normalize it, like we've been saying this whole life, like just normalize talking about it, normalize like us sitting us down and like having these conversations, and like, you know, anything you would do with your straight child, do the same with your queer child, especially if they came out to you already. And if they haven't came out to you, ask them, like, don't make assumptions, don't like talk about it with other family, right? Because what if they didn't want to be outed, right? So just like have these conversations with your child, like just sit down and have these conversations, especially if you're like questioning if your child is queer or not. Literally just ask them. They'll probably tell you no, or they'll probably tell you yes. Like it's all up to them. And like if they're comfortable enough with telling you, then they're going to tell you, you know? So make it a safe space. Make your home like a place where they don't have to hide themselves from you, and like they want to tell you. Like your child should be wanting to tell you about themselves. And a lot of the times they don't. So
Thank you. As the thunder starts, does anyone have anything else to add around that?
I would add, especially if you're not a white family, or you are from like a marginalized religious background, like and are supportive, like introduce your kids to other queer adults from your same community that you know. So I think like I have a cool and accepting Arab mom. I knew that queer people existed. I just like didn't know Arab queer people existed. And so trying to normalize that with like other adults in your lives, if that you know some, that'd be great. I think the other thing is like this is probably helpful if your kid is queer or not queer, like get them in therapy if that's something you have access to. Trying to understand your identity is really confusing, and if you have insurance or money and are able to put your kid in therapy, like being a kid is hard anyways. There's a pandemic, wild police brutality, like they probably need to talk about some stuff anyways. That gives them another adult that they can process with in a healthy way.
Thank you. If no one has anything to add, I want to go to our last question and then give everyone a chance to plug, because I'm all about the plugging. So no one has anything to add, right? I move so fast sometimes, I apologize. No? Okay, bet. How can parents address their friends or family who aren't being respectful to their children who have come out as LGBTQIA+? For example, your child comes out as a trans individual, and at a holiday gathering or neighborhood party, someone misgenders them or uses their dead name. How do you address the situation without embarrassing your kid? This is a good one for me because I'm loud. I would just be like, what? But, you know, sometimes that is not the solution.
I'll just go first. So I actually had the luxury of also working with parents. So I worked with, so like we had some therapeutic support groups, and one of our therapeutic support groups was parents of LGBT kids. So a lot of times parents would come. I mean, it was a small group of parents, but so they would come and they would talk about, you know, their processing of dealing with their child, you know, coming out or you know, being LGBT identified. So I think as a parent, obviously, like I said this before, it's like you have to do the work. At the end of the day, you have to do the work. When you have a child and you're saying and you are committing to the fact that I love this kid and that I'm going to provide my kid with everything they need, their safety, their shelter, their food. It also has to come with accepting your kid as a person, as an autonomous being. So parents have to do the work. They have to, if they can't come to if they can't process and deal with it themselves, then do the work of finding support for themselves in terms of that. But also in terms of I would say if that was to happen, like if that was to happen at a family get together, it would be your responsibility to stage that conversation with that family member. And that would mean a lot to stand up for your kid in that way. I think sometimes parents have a hard time because with their family members, whether it be their sister or whatever, as another adult, those conversations are hard. But you have to be willing to have those conversations. Be willing to say, "This is how my kid identifies," and if it's something that needs to be private, pull that person to the side and have that serious conversation. This is unacceptable. You cannot misgender my kid. If you can't accept that, then we won't be coming. I mean, and that's the reality a lot of parents have to deal with. And that's why I thought it was really interesting when I worked with parents, because we're so used to seeing the narrative of just the kids or just people who are LGBT identified, but we never see the narrative of the parents. Um, and kind of like when parents are dealing with that, they also kind of go through a stage of isolation and alienation. A lot of times I've spoken to parents who they accept their kid because their kid is trans identified or lesbian or whatever, and their whole family disowned them. So now their family doesn't call them. They can't show up to Christmas. They can't do these things. So also that's a lot for that parent to process as well. But it's like, if you really love your child, you have to be dedicated to protecting your child and protecting your child's ability to express themselves in the way that they want to, but also be respected, and like create that I guess that dynamic where even if you don't necessarily agree, like my respect comes first, your kid's respect comes first. So are you going to show up or not? I think that's really important. I think sometimes it's hard, and sometimes parents have to cut ties with things they're so used to having and are comfortable with. But it's like, are you going to do it for your child or not? Are you going to stand up for your child and allow your child to have that emotional, mental, spiritual freedom, or are you going to not support that and potentially lose your child in the long run, whether it be they leave home and they never talk to you again, or they have all these mental health problems or whatever. But I think you have to show up 100%, is just say with your chest essentially, but also in your actions.
Thank you for that, Kiana. Does anyone have anything else to add?
I would just agree with that, but add that, like, no matter how you address it, because it might be different for your culture or values or whatever it is going on, but address it so that your kid knows you addressed it. So even if all you say is, Joe, that's not appropriate, we're going to talk about this later, if that's how your family has to handle it, but do it so your kid knows you did it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Because if you're just doing it like private behind the scenes, but you let it go in front of them, that's the impact your kid has first.
Mm-hmm.
So just make sure you do address it however you address it.
Right. Thank you. So I want to give folks a second. We are nearing, we have 1 minute left. But I want to take, if we don't mind going over a couple minutes, I want to give everyone the opportunity to please share what they're doing. Please share how folks can get in touch with you. If you have, this is the week of action, right? So if anyone else has any actions, any events going on, any Zoom links that they want to share, I would love each one of you to please take the time and share with our amazing audience. So Jamila, what's happening at Citywide Youth and what's happening next?
So we're having a live, right? A Zoom live, and we're gonna be talking about our queer camp, and we're gonna be talking about the needs of queer youth. And our queer young people at our Black and Brown queer camp have came up with most of the issues that we want to be like touching base on. Like, so the process of it was basically us like coming together and dropping like obviously we know there are many issues that need to be solved within the LGBTQIA like youth community, but we decided to try to narrow them down to the ones that we felt in our group were like the now, like the need sooner rather than later, right? So we're gonna just be talking about that on our Zoom live and everything like that. I don't have the link. I'm not sure allowed, but I'm sure you can get that out there.
Sure. And when is this Zoom? We don't have it, but can you tell us when it is?
It is Tuesday.
Okay.
And I'm not sure time yet. In the morning, I think 12, right? During our regular programming time.
Yes.
Yes, 12 during our regular programming time.
Right. So go to Football Youth Coalition's Facebook, Instagram. Yes. Old people are on Facebook. Go to Citizens Coalition IG, Instagram, for those of you who don't know that acronym, to get more information on that live about summing up what Queer Camp is like, summing up the needs of Black and Brown LGBTQIA plus youth. Kylie, do you have a shout out, something that's going on, something that folks need to know about?
Yeah, definitely. So there's two things. One is right now at our Boston site, we're just working on keeping the shelter open during the pandemic. It's particularly dangerous time. We're the only gender neutral shelter in the entire city. So really important for queer and trans youth that we can stay open. So if you want to donate, why do I just search it on Google? We're the first ones. And then the other thing is that if you're an undergraduate student in the New Haven area and wants to get involved in working on the Why Do I New Haven site, there's a lot of pre-work and figuring out like what the student model is going to look like. You can get in touch with Gio Roper, who's the program coordinator. Maybe I can email it to Ola and you can send it out.
Yes. Kiana, what's happening at Life in My Days?
Hey, so currently, Life in My Days, what we're doing, I think right now we're just trying to develop a task force around decolonizing mental health care. So we're trying to put together a task force to address inequality in our current mental health system, specifically for people of color, Black people, undocumented people, transgender people, and people with disabilities. And I think it is stipend. So it's like a 6-week task force, but you do get like a $300. You get $300 at the end of it for participating. And then other than that, we've been trying to just develop different resources for the community right now that is, emerging with the need around protesting, racialized trauma, and specifically also with LGBT youth. And then our mutual aid work is still running. So if anyone needs any, mutual aid, you can get to us by ctmutualaid.com. And there has all the resources, and it also has the link to, we basically take requests. So like if you have any requests of like you may need groceries or things like that, we're also still doing that. And I think that's pretty much it on my end. I think that's pretty much it. Yeah.
And make sure you go to Life in My Days and look at some of those open mics. They are amazing. Yeah. And I was on one, yay. And Mel, what's happening out there?
I mean, a bunch of things. So on Tuesday of this week, actually, our youth team and a couple other youth leaders are doing a webinar, similar topic to this, actually, but youth run. So that'll be interesting. I don't have the link in front of me, but it will be on the True Colors social media. True Colors does a Tuesday night game night on Zoom, and we're going to continue that through the summer. So you can find that all over the social media. We also have Queer Academy, which is Monday and Wednesdays. Monday is an animation class. Wednesday is social justice guest speakers. So PS panelists, email me because come talk to young people. I'm just saying. But that's interesting, and we're taking applications for that right now. So please check the website on that. Q Plus is pretty much like in-person shutdown, but we're doing a monthly open mic online. It's the third Saturday of every month. You can find us all over Instagram with that. And we're always taking like rolling signups for the next one. So if people want to do that, we're there.
Awesome. And so for the Pride Center, because I will not leave us out, we have some zine making and some creative writing workshops happening starting the second week of July on into August. I've lined up 4 amazing creative writing facilitators for the workshop. So you won't just be seeing my face. And we are going to have some zine making events. So if these things are important to you or sound cool, I also want to shout out our youth safe space on Thursday at 6 o'clock, 6 to 7. Please email me at youth@price.org for me to send you that Zoom link. We're trying to keep these links as protected as possible. And I just want to thank each and every one of you amazing souls. It was really great to meet you today, Kylie, and it was really good to spend and share space with you, Jamila, Kiana, and Mel once again. And anyone have any last minute shout outs or anything before we close out? No? Okay, make sure you keep it cute, keep it safe, wear your mask, get your hand sanitizer, fight the patriarchy within yourselves, and make sure you shout out True Colors, Q Plus, Citywide Youth Coalition, Y to Y in Boston, and Y to Y in New Haven coming soon, as well as Life in My Days. Thank you so much for joining us. I had an amazing time with you folks, and you taught me so much as usual. So I will bid you all adieu.